Welcome, faithful listeners, and welcome to another Talk to Doctor Face to Face. Joining me tonight is Philip Segal, the driving force behind the Doctor Who TV movie in the mid-90s, over 25 years ago. Someone who put many years of effort into bringing the show back. And while it might not have led to a series back then, it helped keep the show alive in people's minds and perhaps helped it come back in 2005. So to begin, Philip, you watched the show as a kid. Did it have a big impact on you, and were you a big fan?
I was, yeah. My grandfather sat me on his knee, and we watched the pilot episode of Unearthly Child, and the rest is history. I was hooked, and I've seen most of the 760 episodes that were produced. Some obviously disappeared, but I managed to see a few of the ones that had thought to have been disappeared. So that was wonderful. But yeah, it made a huge impact on my life. This is a character that is beyond multidimensional, and I think services people's needs and desires, and ferments the imagination in ways that I don't even think we've tapped into even yet.
Yeah, I mean, he's quite an unusual hero. I mean, especially in this kind of day and age, he's still someone that he doesn't carry a gun. He carries a screwdriver. It's very he finds peaceful resolutions to problems. I mean, it's just kind of very, very kind of different.
Yeah.
But you spent a long time in America trying to kind of bring the show back. Was that something just because you were a fan of it, or was it because you thought it could become a really big kind of property, or a bit of both? Or
Well, I think as a producer, you always want to. I think you always want to try and come from passion. You want to try and come from something that you believe in. I think because ultimately it does affect the way you think and feel about a project. But yeah, I mean, I sort of grew up with it and watched the demise of it, and this is no slight on John Nathan Turner, who I think did a remarkable job considering the resources that he had and the politics he had to deal with. But I think the show got treated miserably towards the end, and it was a crime because I've always believed that Sylvester McCoy was an amazing and is an amazing actor and a very unique talent. And had he have had a good strong production behind him that believed in the show, it would not have, in my opinion, taken on that very sort of childish, cartoonish kind of feel to it that I think was insulting to the franchise. And that's just my opinion. I know there are those out there who will disagree with me, and I respect that. That's just my opinion.
yeah, no, I mean, I'd agree with that. I mean, I think it was maybe starting to turn around just as it got cancelled. I think they kind of went for a very kind of comedy approach for McCoy's kind of first series, and it took them a lot of time to recover from that, and they just didn't have that time.
Well, you have to understand that at that moment in time, there was no love for Doctor Who at the BBC. They were fed up with it. They didn't want to spend the resources on it. And the executives in charge in that moment hated it. And so they would have done anything in their power to cut the budget and make it go away. And I experienced that at the very sort of beginning of my efforts to get the rights to it. It was vitriolic, the hatred, and that was tragic because the reality there, of course, is that they were civil servants, and a lot of them were just bean counters, and they were just pumping out content. Very rarely did you have people like Alan Yentob, who, in my opinion, was a consummate professional and a true artist's friend and an artist in his own right. and but he was at the very, very top, and he didn't have it. He didn't have his uh, he didn't have it, his attention set on Doctor Who. He had an entire network to run,
Mhm.
but he loved Doctor Who, and he believed in Doctor Who. He just didn't have the time or the energy to get everyone else to
Mhm.
do it. And what would have been wrong with saying, "Hey, let's give it a break for a few years. Let's take a break. Let's polish it up, and let's see where we can take this wonderful franchise." Instead, it was like, "Oh no, been there, done that," and there were all these
Mhm.
sort of stuffy old men in tired suits. I mean, literally. I mean, and I don't mean that to sound angry, but that's what I encountered.
Mhm. How did you manage to kind of win them round? Was it just sheer persistence over? Was it 7 years it took?
Yeah, it took 7 years. Well, I at the time, I mean, I would send letters and have calls. In those days we didn't have text, email, or
Mhm.
social media, so it was all done the old-fashioned way. But my big break came, and I talk about this in the book,
Mhm.
but my big break came when I was producing a show I worked for Spielberg for almost
Mhm.
6 years. I ran his television company, and I was producing a show that I had created called Sequest.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And the BBC at the time were interested in airing it.
Mhm.
And so every May, all the executives from the various different networks around the world would come to what was called the May screenings in Los Angeles.
Mhm.
And they would get to sort of take a look at what Hollywood was producing and decide whether or not they were going to buy it or not for their network. Well, Alan Yentub was here, and I got a call one day in my office saying that Alan Yentub, we would like to give him a tour of the sets.
Mhm.
And so I knew that that was my opportunity to accost him. And so I picked him up in a golf cart with a bunch of executives from the studio, from Universal,
Mhm.
and took him over to the set. And started talking about the show. But of course, I sort of introduced myself and started telling him who I was, and finally I literally pinned him down, and I said, "We want the rights to Doctor Who."
Mhm.
And that's when he said to me, he said, "Okay, you can have them."
Mhm. Do you think the being on set and seeing the kind of quality of show that could be kind of produced, do you think that might have been something that helped get rid of the old wobbly sets kind of notion and stuff and showed kind of potential?
Possibly. I mean, I think that was definitely, I'm sure, part of it. But I think
Mhm.
there were many factors. He
Mhm.
knew that he had a group of executives in London who didn't want to make it.
Mhm.
He saw the potential in it. He always saw the potential in it, and he thought to himself, "Well, um, could be in worse hands than Steven Spielberg." So I think
Mhm.
that was sort of the whole the thought process. At least
Mhm.
I can't put myself in his head, but
Mhm.
I imagine that was it.
Was Spielberg interested in being actively involved with it at one point?
Well, the way it worked was we sort of, our job was to create content for his company,
Mhm.
and not everything we made was for him, but it was under his banner, so obviously it had to be of a certain quality, and it had to make sense that it would be something that he would be involved in. But
Mhm.
it was never intended that he would be the
Mhm.
producer of it, unless he decided to put his name on it, and that
Mhm.
that could have happened. But there were so many other reasons why it all fell apart. That they're complicated, but they have to do with uh, how studios are set up, writing deals are made,
Mhm.
and how things are financed. And that's just the nature of the business. And so you win some and you lose some, but
Mhm.
you just, if you believe in something, you just keep pounding the pavement until you can put the package together and and
Mhm.
and, and get it made.
I mean, with that one, was there an unusual number of different rights involved?
Not rights, no. If you're referring to the monsters, yeah,
Mhm,
well, it was a bit of a mess in terms of what the BBC had done early on in creating Doctor Who. They'd given the rights to the various creatures to those who created them.
mhm,
So obviously Terry Nation created the Daleks, so he owned the Daleks,
mhm,
and on and on and on. And so there were very few creatures that the BBC actually had the rights to. They
mhm,
they belonged to the various writers who created them, which was completely ridiculous.
mhm,
Along with the main title theme, which I don't get credit for this, but I should. The reason why the BBC is still allowed to use the Doctor Who theme is because I renegotiated the deal with Warner Chappell Music, who they'd sold it
mhm.
to be able to use it. Otherwise, they did not even have the rights to their own theme tune.
That I never realized. I mean, it's amazing that they could do something like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing, and they just
Mhm,
didn't care. They literally treated it at the end there as this sort of this old kind of sock, that was still in the drawer.
mhm,
But there was a gentleman by the name of Tony Greenwood who, at the time, he was in charge of something called BBC Enterprises,
mhm,
and in those days, BBC Enterprises was set up to exploit the rights to content in the BBC library. And he came out of ancillary rights sales, really. So he was not as strong in the sale of the actual show, but he was a lot stronger in selling the merchandising. And there were amazingly ridiculous amounts of uh, ancillary deals that were out there that I don't even know if the BBC to this day really realizes or knows how many licenses were sold and in what category, because it
mhm.
was crazy.
Did the BBC, as it kind of produced, as it kind of got closer to actually be kind of becoming an actual thing, did the BBC get more excited and start to get on board, or was there always resistance from them right up to the movie coming out?
No resistance all the way to the end.
Mhm,
And they just they put as many buses on me as they could possibly get on me.
mhm,
I had a woman by the name of Joe Wright. I had another gentleman, I can't remember his name anymore, who was her boss. And at the time, he was in charge of dramatic scripted content at the BBC. And,
mhm,
he was pushing 80, and just a very miserable human being.
mhm,
And so it was just, it was literally to create hurdles for me. and
mhm.
and they loved their paperwork, and they
Yeah.
loved their meetings and their phone calls, and it was exhausting, but we got
Mhm.
there.
Yeah. I mean, was there anything that it stopped you from doing, or did they just make everything hard, or was there anything they actively kind of stopped?
No, well, the only thing they the line in the sand for them was Sylvester McCoy. They did not
Mhm,
want him to be in the show, and they
mhm,
didn't want me to give him an opportunity to regenerate into Paul.
mhm,
Their whole position on it was Americans don't care, won't care, and this is a new era, and let's just start again. And
mhm,
I said, you can't do that. You've got continuity here that the fans will appreciate, and you've got to be respectful of that. You know you can make anything incredible as long as you make it credible.
mhm,
And I was just, I saw myself as the sort of um, I was the sort of self-made sort of protector of it. As long as I was the producer,
mhm,
I wanted to protect it, not just for me, but for future, you know, producers as well. I mean, that's the whole idea with a franchise like this: is you come in, you try to do the best job you can, but really all you are is you're a caretaker.
mhm,
And you try to do the best you can to create an opportunity for the legacy to continue and not screw it up.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think for the fans having like McCoy back was, I mean, it was massive. I mean, that
Well,
that
I
kind of
wanted
links it
to.
as well.
I mean, it was also, it was deliberate to force them to acknowledge the fact that this was the next season
Hmm.
of their show. I wanted them to think of it in those terms and not think of it as something else. They didn't really want to do that, but I refused to give that notion up.
Hmm. But were they quite keen for it to be quite Americanized and make it very distinct from what came before?
No, no, they weren't like that. I mean, they were very happy with the fact that I wanted to sort of maintain its Britishness, as it were.
Hmm.
But they and they also, there were a lot of cultural bridges that had to be built, but
Hmm.
they weren't looking at it as as it had to be Americanized,
Hmm.
and I didn't look at it through that lens either.
I mean, in terms of the show's generally been kind of either set in like studios in space, or when it has came to Earth, it's almost exclusively been kind of in and around the UK. Um, with it being in America, that gives it an immediate kind of like exotic kind of flavor. Was there a specific reason you wanted to kind of have it in San Francisco specifically?
Well, San Francisco is one of those very unique cities. It's been, it's sort of indelibly. There are so many great films that have been there, and great movie scenes and great chases. From Steve McQueen's Bullet to Clint Eastwood's Dirty Harry
Hmm.
and everything in between. San Francisco is very iconic and sort of very American, but it has this sort of um, it has this very unique flavor to it. It has a lot
Hmm.
of culture, but it was quite visual.
Hmm.
So I just like the idea that it was one of those extraordinary places that he'd never visited.
Yeah. I mean, it gives you a really good kind of backdrop. I mean, it's almost like a kind of character just by itself.
Yeah, yeah, very much so, very much so. But you're right about exotic. I mean, there were opportunities for us to go to be able to do things in series that we wouldn't have been do. We didn't need to be in gravel pits and
Hmm.
on the tubes, in the underground.
Hmm.
We had an opportunity to go to travel to other states and do other things. So
Hmm.
it could have been wonderful, but sadly, it wasn't to be.
Hmm. I mean, even just in terms of like the TARDIS set itself, I mean, that's you're immediately kind of going from a fairly small enclosed kind of set to this massive big kind of area that kind of stretches on forever and actually kind of looks lived in. It had a very nice kind of almost Jules Verne kind of feel to it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, Jules Verne was a huge influence for me as a child. I didn't read Asimov. I was more fantasy than I was pure science fiction, and
Mhm.
and I just loved the timeless nature of that sort of Victoriana. But scale was very important because when you think about aliens and alien planets and the scope of their worlds,
Mhm.
you try to do something that sort of opens up people's imaginations and their minds to scale.
Mhm.
And that's something that you never get in the UK, with all due respect.
Mhm.
They don't think about scale, especially in television, just because things aren't built in scale there.
Mhm.
So I think it was a great opportunity to really play with that and give it the sort of the scope that it deserved.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's meant to be this limitless kind of thing, but in the TV show, you're generally always in this like 20-foot kind of square kind of area, whereas this one, it did suggest it was almost like an endless castle or something. I mean, bits of it were almost kind of medieval in kind of some ways.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's called budget.
Yeah.
And like also, I mean, UK production follows US production, not just
Mhm.
in a lot of ways. You build a set, you better use it. The
Mhm.
studio will get up your backside.
Mhm.
You build something, you got to use it, not just once. You need to use it, every week. Otherwise, they
Mhm.
can't amortize the cost of a show, and
Mhm.
that's where the expense comes from. But curiously, when I was producing television, $2.5 to $3 million an episode was just almost unheard of.
Mhm.
Today, they're spending 12, 15 million dollars an episode on television.
Mhm. I think with the recent deal with Disney, I think Doctor Who's kind of finally kind of getting close to that kind of budget again.
That's right.
Um, the you've got the kind of like the alien kind of bit at the start with the kind of the very brief kind of Dalek cameo. Was that a major headache to get the Daleks even just for those few seconds?
No, no, we had the rights to use the Daleks. Terry's daughter, who lives in Los Angeles, or did at the time, was wonderful
Hmm.
and more than happy to help. That was not an issue.
Hmm.
Uh, the issue was just cost, and I just got slammed.
Hmm.
So many times we wanted to do much bigger things, and really, Doctor Who and the Daleks was going to be the quintessential. That's what we wanted to do.
Hmm.
We just couldn't afford to do it.
Hmm.
So I was forced to create a human adventure for him.
Hmm.
When I mean human, I mean actors as villains as opposed to building machines that we couldn't afford to produce.
Hmm. I was kind of wondering if that was in some ways a beneficial choice or a deliberate choice because it for people kind of coming in having kind of robots, it's a bit more exotic. But if you've got a kind of a humanoid kind of villain, it's a bit more kind of traditional. It's maybe a bit easier for a new audience to kind of buy into. It's a bit more kind of classic kind of structure.
Well, yes and no. I think the secret to successful robots is the fact that um, you know a perfect example would be Terminator, right?
Hmm.
You see the Terminator in action, you know what he's capable of,
Hmm.
and you know how dangerous he can be, and you see him kill somebody.
Hmm.
And I think as long as the audience understands what they're capable of and what they do,
Hmm.
I think they'll go along with you. It's when they have no point of view about what it is they're seeing
Hmm.
that you get that disconnect. But I think as long as you educate them, that they
Hmm.
most audiences love to be way ahead of the characters they're watching.
Yeah.
So if they know what's around the corner but our character doesn't, that's good.
Hmm.
So I think that it's always a function of, if you can show an audience just exactly how deadly or dangerous something is, I think they'll
Hmm.
buy in.
Hmm. The with the choice of the master, was um that was kind of mainly kind of cost kind of born, but was that something that it kind of let you kind of get in a fairly kind of big name? Did that kind of help the kind of process as well with Eric
Well,
Roberts?
the master is the quintessential villain.
Hmm.
So, and that was easy for the Fox network to get its head around. It's like
Hmm.
they understood.
Yeah.
So they didn't have an issue with that. And then, of course, then it's just about getting lists of names that mean something to the network,
Hmm.
that they want to play with. And then, of course, it's not just that list. It's whether or not the people on that list are A, available, B, are willing to do it, and C, can you afford them?
Hmm.
So you go through this kind of ritual of having a list.
Hmm.
Here's your number one choice,
Hmm.
and here's your number 10 choice, and everybody signs off on the sort of the top 10, and you take
Hmm.
number one and you go down the list until you hit one,
Hmm.
and that's kind of how you do it.
Yeah. Was it quite a big list for the role of the master, or was it kind of like a fairly kind of
No, it
small one?
was. No, it was. Originally, they wanted Christopher Lloyd,
Hmm.
and he wasn't available. But he was interested and was willing to take a meeting. But
Mhm.
He just became unavailable, and
Mhm.
so we had quite a list of names, but you get it starts to get tricky because in those days, I say in those days because it's the world is different now. In those
Mhm.
days, television was a dirty word to film actors in
Mhm.
America, not in the UK, but here it was.
Mhm.
uh, and But ironically today, if you're not on television, you can't you're not bankable for a film.
Mhm.
So that's how times have changed. But Eric was always one of those great names. His body of work was good,
Mhm.
and he was well known, and he was struggling at the time, and so was willing to do it.
Mhm.
And it was one of the better names in those days, if you can believe it or not. And
Mhm.
Eric's a good guy. I've spent a little bit of time with him recently at a con in Seattle, and
Mhm.
you know, and um, he life's taken its toll on him, but
Mhm.
he's a changed person now.
Yeah. I mean, he's recently kind of gone back to doing the master with some of the big Finnish audios,
Has he?
which was it's kind of nice, kind of hearing him in that kind of role again. It's especially when he's up against sometimes some of the other people that have kind of played the role, and
Right.
you get
I
his kind
don't
of very
know.
take on it.
Yeah, I don't know. I was kept out of Big Finish.
Hmm.
For some reason, I'm a persona non grata over there.
Hmm. They seem to have a very specific kind of way of working, and a very kind of closed infrastructure. I'm not quite sure why they operate that way.
Yeah, I don't
Um,
know. I don't know anything about him.
mhm. I mean, even expanding out to kind of Eric Roberts and kind of people like that. I mean, it took them a long time before they I don't know if it was just they exhausted the pool that they were in and had to kind of go a bit wider or something. But it did take a long time before they started to kind of reach out there. I mean, I don't know if
Yeah,
that might have been a rights issue. I know the TV movie has had kind of complicated rights kind of afterwards, which have kind of restricted how it's been used in some ways.
yeah. I don't know. I don't know. You would think now more than ever they would, Universal would have wanted, but there's a very good chance that 100% of the executives there didn't know anything about Doctor Who, and
Mm-hmm.
didn't really know what to do with it. I mean, it's a different world over there now.
Mm-hmm. It's always kind of surprising in the US. You generally assume that the vast majority of people have never seen it, but just every now and again you'll get a big name that happens to kind of mention it in passing as something they watched because they saw it in like public television when they were growing up. I
It's
think
very sad. I mean,
mhm.
and that most most executives today don't couldn't tell you about a movie past 95. I mean,
Mhm.
they've never seen them, and they don't know anything about it.
Yeah, no, that is a bit depressing.
Yeah, it
You always
is.
assume you always just assume that kind of people kind of they kind of get into it for a love of things and they've got a good kind of schooling in the history of these things.
Well, yeah, I mean, as a filmmaker or a television producer or a film, but it doesn't matter what you are. You should be a student of the culture, and know.
Mhm.
I think you should be, you should sample things from every decade, and be
Mhm.
aware of what the tastes were, and what the politics were at the time, because it's a great resource, but
Mhm. But
no, very rare to find.
when it came to casting kind of Paul McGann, was him having some kind of like background in films? Did that make it a bit easier to kind of get him cast?
Um, I don't know if it was so much that as
Mhm.
it was trying to really articulate the sort of the dimensions of what the Doctor is and should be.
Mhm.
And lots of conversations were had about tone, and about making sure that it was a quality British actor
Mhm.
who was not going to be looked at in a cartoonish way. It would have been devastating to have looked found a comedian, for instance,
Hmm.
although Michael Crawford being an exception to that rule. But no, I mean, it was really sort of trying to find that one person who ticked all the boxes, and for
Hmm.
me, Paul did that.
But was he quite keen to kind of, if it went on to a series, to kind of stay on and kind of commit to kind of multiple years?
No, not at first.
Yeah.
No, no, that was a real issue. He was very, very concerned about that.
Hmm.
And because he had a very successful career, and this is it's classic. It's like playing James Bond. You do get typecast in a strange sort of way,
Hmm.
and that can be limiting to some people. And there is a lot of snobbery around people who go, well, if he's willing to do that, then
Hmm.
he's not much of an actor. I mean, you got a little bit of that, but I think as he got more comfortable with it, and I think he really enjoyed himself,
Hmm.
it became more and more appealing to him. But he didn't do. I mean, after the film, he wouldn't do he wouldn't do these conventions for years. I mean,
Hmm.
uh, I remember getting so many phone calls from people asking me if I would call him and get him to change his mind, or
Hmm.
would he go if I went, and all of this, and it was just simply he didn't I just don't think he really understood the impact of it. He does
Hmm.
now, obviously,
Yeah.
but he didn't then.
Yeah, I mean, he got the chance, kind of famously a few years back, to kind of come back and do a regeneration scene,
Yeah, yeah,
and that really shot like 7, 8 minutes. I mean, that was just something that like fans just went absolutely kind of crazy for, just to see him
yeah,
again as the Doctor. And it just
yeah,
shows that
yeah.
the affection for he's only had this one TV movie, like kind of like 90 like minutes of like being the Doctor, and people are still ranking him as like he's the favorite Doctor. It's remarkable given the limited kind of time.
Well, I think he's a consummate actor. I mean, he really is. He's very special in that regard, and so I think he took it very seriously, and I think the audience, the fans, could feel that.
Mhm. In terms of the show, I mean, there was some things that you did to kind of push the boundaries, like the making the Doctor kind of half human. You had to kind of kiss. There was a bit more action in that was involved, and were they all things that you thought were important just to try and kind of make it a bit different from the classic show?
Well, I was, these. I always get these questions, and I
Mhm.
find it fascinating that you know, over the years that Doctor Who was produced, nobody ever complained about all of you know, the various different elements that were bolted onto the show over the years, all the rules that were created from writer to writer to writer. Nobody ever
Mhm.
complained,
Mhm.
and so I come along and sort of try to add some, my own thoughts to it.
Mhm.
And there was an uproar. I mean, why was it that the Doctor spent so much time in England?
Mhm.
Why? And so I tried to create a reason why.
Mhm.
I tried to create a reason why he was drawn to this particular place and time.
Mhm.
And so for me, it was always the notion that perhaps the that his father as a time traveler
Mhm.
was sort of so enamored with it that that's why he was drawn to it.
Mhm.
And so it was just simply it was me trying to sort of uh, create sort of my interpretation of what I thought the mythology, where it was going, and
Mhm.
what trying to interpret, writers in the past.
Mhm. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about since the show came back in 2005, they've never contradicted that bit about him being half human. It's been left alone. It's not been revisited, but they've deliberately never contradicted it. So I mean, could be something they could still to this day come back and pick up on.
No, and they should. They
Hmm.
should, because there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's the same with the kiss.
Hmm.
You know, why could he not kiss somebody? You know, it was
Hmm.
like, I get the whole sort of, well, if he's betrothed to another, you know,
Hmm.
another person, that means that the audience, the fans who have this fantasy of, you know, being the doctor's next, you know, boyfriend or girlfriend would, you know, it just sort of, it's a turnoff. I don't think that's true.
Hmm.
I mean, you know, of all the people in the world, why is that just so wrong? It fascinates me.
Hmm. I mean, it's they've certainly been coy with it. I mean, they've done it a few times. David kind of Tennant and Billy Piper, where they've had it that it's fairly obvious that there's something kind of going on, but they always just back away from like really saying it, and they tease it, but they always just have a little bit of ambiguity there, just so that they can say, "Oh no, there's nothing really there."
Right.
It
Yeah.
just.
It is interesting. You know, the other thing that I found really interesting too is how over the years, you know, the Doctor, when he regenerated, got younger and younger and younger and younger and younger, because
Mhm.
obviously, you know, he started out as a 70-year-old actor.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it was kind of strange when they eventually cast Peter Capaldi, with you'd had the trend where it was going down and down and down, and then suddenly it kind of went the other way, and you were really kind of back to that kind of like almost kind of 60s Doctor Who. Have you,
Yeah,
have you continued watching the show since it's came back in 2005?
I haven't. I haven't. I've seen a few of
Hmm.
the episodes. I was asked to produce it in 2003,
Hmm.
and but for personal reasons, I couldn't. I couldn't move back to the UK at that time,
Hmm.
so I turned it down. But uh, you know, life goes on, and you know, you find yourself sort of, you know, struggling to keep up with what's going on. And I'd been there and done that, but I've checked out a few episodes. You know, it's
Hmm.
beautifully produced, beautifully written.
Hmm.
It's wonderful to see.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely made with a lot of still like the TV movie. It's been made with a lot of love and affection. I mean, it's treated as a very kind of serious kind of thing that needs to be kind of protected, which is good.
That's right, it is. It's wonderful to see. Yeah.
In terms of like we know we only kind of got the movie and it never kind of led to the series. How close did it kind of come to getting to that series?
Well, I mean, it got close, but there were a bunch of reasons why we couldn't really
Mhm.
accept the offers. You know, there was an offer for 6 additional episodes, but there were all kinds of disagreements between Fox and Universal over budgets, and you know, when they would start production, and
Mhm.
Universal wanted it all now, 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 now. You know, it was not a great marriage,
Mhm.
but you know, at the time, it made the most sense for us in terms of Fox was the biggest risk taker at the time in terms of their content. You know, I mean, this was
Mhm.
the home of Married with Children, and you know, they were taking all kinds of risks, and so I think that was a good thing.
Mhm.
But you know, it was also really bad timing, because um, scripted television was starting to go through a difficult time economically,
Mhm.
and and so trying to figure out how to pay for this stuff and make it a business became, you know, became really difficult. And in fact, it was only a few years later where companies literally stopped producing sitcoms, and scripted content was almost gone.
Mhm.
If it wasn't for the over the tops and cable realizing there's an opportunity here for us to fill a hole,
Mhm.
it was a really bad time to be in scripted television.
Mhm. I mean, was it in terms of what you were hoping for a series? Would that have been quite a long run you were looking for, like kind of 20 episodes or something ideally?
Well, you always want a minimum of 13
Mhm,
because it's just a cost thing. It's the cost of producing something.
mhm,
You can, if you have 13 episodes, you can steal from those budgets, right? You can sort of mortgage the future of the show,
mhm,
and you can create things that perhaps will have story arcs that you'll do more than one of.
mhm,
Um, the less of the less episodes you have, the less money there is to go around. So it was always purely economics. The larger the order, the more you could do.
mhm. I mean, there was a kind of a Bible for the series. Was that something that was mainly just to generate interest, or was that the seed for what would have happened?
No, it was genuinely a Bible. I
Mhm,
mean, those were very real episodes, and I thought there was some really great subject matter there. I
mhm,
mean, and I for me, the first six episodes were really going to be about introducing the Doctor to the American audience. I mean, I knew from the very beginning that no matter what I did, the fans would be there for me.
mhm,
They were going to be very loyal and put up with a lot.
mhm.
Uh, but it was everyone else I was trying to reach who
Yeah.
didn't know who Doctor Who was, who didn't care, who didn't, and that's always the biggest challenge because you're trying to you're trying to please your fan base, but you're also trying to get the broadest audience you can. But no, the Bible, we put a lot of time and effort into that, and
Mhm,
things would have gotten finessed, and the writing pool would have changed, most likely. But no, there was some really, I think there was some really good content there.
mhm. I mean, I remember looking at it. It was a good few years now, but from a memory, there was like things like there was a kind of reimagined kind of like Cybermen. So you were taking some things from the kind of classic series and kind of packaging it and doing it slightly different ways and taking ideas and going off in different directions with them.
Right. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I mean,
Mhm,
with those were all good villains. I mean,
mhm,
Cybermen were fantastic. I mean, I think that it was always really about how you told those stories, and what the Doctor's real sort of job was in the universe. What was he
mhm,
really doing out there, and why was he out there? In a weird sort of way, if you look at the character of in the original series, Star Wars series of Han Solo,
mhm,
you do start to get a little bit of what the Doctor was in terms of you know what he perhaps got involved with, or got up to. I mean, I always like to believe that he was. I mean, he was always a renegade in a lot of sort of ways. He didn't like the politics of Gallifrey. He
mhm,
came back when he had to, but he was much happier, sort of traveling around the universe, seeing what adventures he could have.
mhm,
And I think because of his intellect, and because of his abilities to travel in time, and to sort of understand what stewardship meant, I think he could do a lot of good
mhm,
out there in the universe. So I think that the connection to those characters and those villains was good. I mean, the writing on a lot of levels was very good. It
mhm,
just it it didn't it didn't take too many risks, because a
mhm,
lot of the writers back then didn't have that skill set. They
mhm,
didn't know how to get out of their comfort zone
mhm,
and push the envelope. They were just servicing a show. But I think with the right producers, and the right stewardship, you could have gotten a lot more out of it. So I think that there was a lot to mine there, and it,
mhm,
and it, and it made no sense to pretend like it didn't exist, or not have fun with it.
mhm. Was it something you kind of planned to? I mean, there's a big kind of mythos there. I mean, even in the 90s, you're talking about 30 years of kind of content. Was the plan to kind of bring that in slowly and kind of build it up, or kind of take that as a kind of basis and kind of go off in your own kind of direction?
No, I think there was a lot of stories that we could have taken, created prequels or sequels to, and and
Mm,
and try to really. I was really interested in getting into the sort of the psyche of what was going on, not just in his own head, but
mm,
also in the universe that he inhabited. I mean, that's part of the fun of making shows like this, is
mm,
playing with the universe and really getting into the weeds on, why things were the way they were.
mm. How did the Americans respond to the Doctor as a kind of hero character? Did they get him, or was that something they never quite got? Or
Well, I think they responded very well. I mean, if you consider the fact, go back and look at the numbers.
Mhm.
I think we did a 9 share. Um, you know, um, you can't get a 9 share today.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a mega hit. But in those days, it wasn't enough. It was the night John Goodman had a heart attack on Roseanne, and so
Mhm,
everybody was tuned in. And and so it was one of those things. The other dirty secret that nobody wants to talk about is the economics.
mhm,
Okay, so it had nothing to do with the creativity of the show. The show was
mhm,
very well received,
mhm,
but the dirty secret is okay. Well, I own 100% of this,
mhm,
and I only own 50% of this. So which show am I going to buy?
mhm,
What am I going to put on the air? Would I take something that I get 100% of, or do I take something I only get half of?
mhm,
And nobody wants to talk about that, but
mhm,
that's the reality of the business. These were business decisions, and so
mhm,
there's nothing you can do about that. A lot of it is luck and timing, and
mhm,
you have to have executives in positions of power
mhm,
who want to make things happen. If they want to make things happen, they happen. If
mhm.
they don't, they don't.
I mean, the merchandise wasn't quite such a big thing in the 90s as it kind of became from maybe about the 2000s onwards. I mean, Doctor Who's always been a property with a lot of potential. There's all these kind of monsters and things. So there's a lot of merchandise kind of potential there. If that was bigger in the 90s and that had been something more interested, do you think that would have helped?
Well, merchandising is an interesting topic, and we could spend hours talking about it. Doctor Who was seen in 180 countries around the world,
Mhm,
and it was a profit center for the BBC. They were having no problem making money on it. The difficulty in the US is, probably without exaggeration, the largest television audience in the world.
mhm,
And they what they do is they learn about something and then they get on board.
mhm,
So what you don't want to do is you don't want to spend a lot of time and money tooling up and getting merchandise out there before the audience has had a chance to embrace it and get on
mhm,
board. So usually the smart move is you start introducing merchandising, in year two and year three, and then off you go.
mhm,
Now there are always exceptions to that rule, and that's when it's a brand that the audience is already very well aware of.
mhm,
But in 96, Doctor Who was only seen on public television
mhm,
in about 27 states. So it was not something broadly seen. And the
mhm,
difficulty is, if you can imagine showing Doctor Who to a
mhm.
television executive who'd never seen it would just make their heads explode.
Yeah.
And so, teaching people that no, that don't think of it in those terms was very difficult,
Mhm,
very, very, very difficult. But the answer to your question is, no, it wouldn't have made a difference.
mhm. With all these kind of forces kind of pulling in kind of different directions, is there anything that you didn't get to do with the TV show that you really would have liked to have done? Sorry, the TV movie.
Um, yeah, I mean, I really wanted it to be Doctor Who and the Daleks. That's what I
Mhm,
wanted it to be, and it could have been fantastic. But unfortunately, the script that we originally were going to use, um, it budgeted out. We were about 1.2 million short. We
mhm.
just couldn't do it,
Yeah.
and with no guarantee that they would allow us to to hold and save all these props and build everything. They just weren't willing to commit. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's a disappointment. Um, but at the end of the day, I was just thrilled to get a green light and thrilled to have an opportunity to do something that for 7 years
Mhm.
people said no to me.
Yeah. I mean, it's remarkable that you spent such a long time kind of like fighting for it. I mean, 7 years is a massive kind of like chunk of time. I mean, um, was that just was there any kind of point where you almost kind of gave up on that, or was it just like a determination that you just knew you'd get there one day, or?
I never gave up,
Mhm.
um, but I never really thought about it in those terms.
Mhm.
I was, in my earlier days, I was very arrogant, and I was very headstrong,
Mhm.
and to me, no meant yes.
Mhm.
And so I had thick skin because as a producer, um, and I'm sure this is true in the UK as well, and around the world, for every 10 shows that you pitch,
Mhm.
you might get one sold and picked up, and on average, there's
Mhm.
obviously there are people who are more successful or less successful, but
Mhm.
so you just sort of keep plowing on.
Mhm.
And when there are passion projects, you keep the fire stoked,
Mhm.
but you realize you've got to put food on the table, so you have to do other things.
Mhm.
But I was determined to get it made.
Mhm.
I wanted to make it because it was very important to me,
Mhm.
and so the gods were good to me, and I was given an opportunity to do it, but it was, albeit, you know, very fleeting.
Mhm. I mean, it's definitely something to be proud of. I mean, I remember I was a fan in the '80s, and then those wilderness years, you really just genuinely never thought it was going to come back. And I remember being a lot younger, but being really excited at the thought that we were going to get actual new Doctor Who. You just did not think that was going to happen, and then obviously years later it came back. But I think a part of that has to have been this movie in the '90s just helping another audience kind of come along and get it, and just kind of keeping it alive that little bit longer.
Yeah, it was wonderful. I actually I went to a gallery convention before it
Mhm.
exploded again.
Mhm.
This would have been in 90, I think in 95,
Mhm.
and it was held at a little hotel in LA. And I came to the convention and I sat in the audience. Nobody knew who I was. I didn't tell anybody that I was there. And I think can't remember who the doctors were who were up on the stage, but there was a bunch of conversation about, do you think it would ever get made again? And there were
Mhm.
rumors circulating that someone was trying to get it made.
Mhm.
And do you think that would ever happen? At that point, I had a green light, so I knew it was
Mhm.
happening. But I wanted to just hear. I wanted to get a vibe for the American audience,
Mhm.
and albeit there couldn't have been more than 75 people in the room,
Mhm.
maybe a little more, but wow, the passion was palpable.
Mhm. I mean, it must have one of the most kind of passionate fan bases out there. I mean, like Star Trek and kind of Star Wars as well, but there's just something about this small kind of British show. It's run for such a long time, and there's fans that are just totally obsessed with it.
Yeah, oh, very much so.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, very much so. And it's wonderful.
Mhm.
I think that that's the very essence of fandom, isn't it?
Mhm. Have you engaged a lot with kind of fandom? Just me kind of since the movie, have you kind of done the conventions and kind of talked
I
to
did.
people about it?
I did quite a few conventions early on, and then I
Mhm.
stopped just because of time and personal reasons.
Mhm.
But I just did BritCon in Seattle with Paul and Eric, and Matthew was there. Matthew Jacobs, the
Mhm.
writer. It was wonderful. It was
Mhm.
it was great to see everybody. I mean, Dana would have been there, but she had
Mhm.
COVID, and Yiji had just gotten a gig, so he couldn't make
Mhm.
it. But yeah, it was wonderful to hang out with everybody for the
Mhm.
weekend, and the fans were terrific.
Mhm. Have you managed to kind of keep in touch with any of them, or is it more just these odd chances to kind of bump into people?
No, I don't. I get an email um, from Paul once in a while, and we run
Mhm.
into each other in London, and so that's always nice, and grab a beer. But no, for the most part, everybody sort of goes their separate ways.
Mhm. If if you'd had a chance, I mean, obviously you've done this with Doctor Who, and it's a kind of landmark thing. Was there any other shows where you'd have liked to have done something kind of similar, or was it really just Doctor Who? Or
Well, I did with Sequest. I mean,
Mhm.
I was a big Irwin Allen fan,
Mhm.
and I loved Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, and I couldn't get the rights to it. So
Mhm.
that's why I created Sequest. It was essentially Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
Mhm.
But no, because, it's very difficult. In those days when I was sort of doing my thing,
Mhm.
um, there were a lot. They were always more interested in you helping them with their projects, the studios, than really getting yours off the ground. And once in a while, you were allowed to get yours off the ground, but for the most part, I
Mhm.
was just I was a working stiff.
Mhm. Is that culture changed at all since the 90s, or is it just that's the way it always was?
No, I think it's changed quite a bit now. I
Mhm.
mean, I think there's a lot more independence and a lot more willing to sort of play with things
Mhm.
and try different things. I mean, I think with the advent of these streaming services
Mhm.
a lot of the pay cables,
Mhm.
opportunities to really push the envelope and try different things. I
Mhm.
think it's become, the opportunities are there.
Mhm.
It's just as hard, if not harder, to get anything made, but the
Mhm.
opportunities are certainly there that weren't there in the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly there's a willingness to kind of take a risk and put quite big budgets into things,
Yeah,
especially from the streaming companies.
absolutely. Yeah.
You kind of moved more into kind of reality kind of TV in the last like kind of 10 kind of 15 years. Is that quite a different thing to quite a different beast to make?
Well, it was. I mean, I'm out of it now. I'm
Mhm.
retired,
Mhm.
but I sold my company in 2009 and stayed on till 17.
Mhm.
But I moved into reality programming when scripted content, was just, you couldn't get anything made.
Mhm.
And so reality television was cheap and fast, and I was interested in exploring, you
Mhm.
know, sort of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and it became it was very natural to me. It was very easy for me to do it.
Mhm. I mean, there were definitely kind of shows that you certainly saw some fairly kind of different parts of the world because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I got to travel, see the whole world. I've seen
Mhm.
all 50 states, which is extraordinary. I had a great career.
Mhm.
I did 38 years, and could have done a lot more, but my personal life got in the way.
Mhm. Was
And so that made it difficult for me to do some of the things I really wanted to do. I directed
Mhm.
for a while, and that was fun, but
Mhm.
again, it was very difficult for me to juggle my personal life and my
Mhm.
career.
Well, is there any kind of one regret, something that you didn't get a chance to do that you'd have really loved to do?
Yeah. So there was there was for 5 minutes, we were sort of very heavily uh, very heavily developing, a reboot of Land of the Giants,
Mhm.
uh, the Owen Allen television show, and I got very close, but
Mhm.
it didn't happen, and so that was disappointing.
Mhm. No, that would have been something. I mean, that was a massive show back in its day.
Yeah, it was fun, and
Mhm.
and I was directing at the time, and so it was one of those things where everybody was sort of talking about it, and there was a brand new television network at the time. It was called UPN, United
Mhm.
Paramount Network. It became the WB, and I think now, I don't know what happened. It just disappeared. But
Mhm.
the gentleman who was running it at the time was a dear friend, and
Mhm.
we had many meetings and conversations, and it was all sort of coming together. And then as quickly as it was coming together, it just sort of all blew up. But
Mhm.
that's what happens.
Yeah. Is it in terms of like kind of directing and producing? Did you have a kind of a preference, one that you enjoyed more than the other?
Um, no, I mean, I love producing and I love directing.
Mhm.
I think that they sort of go hand in hand for me. You know,
Mhm.
working closely with actors is great fun.
Mhm.
Working closely with writers is always great fun. And when you have that collision of two, you can really make magic.
Mhm.
Um, and it's as I always felt it was the purest, closest way to sort of really get in the center of your craft.
Mhm.
And so I loved it, and I was thrilled. I loved. I did a lot of Mutant X,
Mhm.
um, and I did Kevin Sorbo's Andromeda and
Mhm.
Beastmaster. They were fun because you didn't have a lot of oversight, and you had to produce them fast,
Mhm.
but it was an adrenaline rush. I enjoyed it.
Mhm. I mean, they're all kind of good shows that have got a fairly kind of healthy kind of cult following.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I mean, it's uh, in terms of like looking kind of back over your kind of whole career. Is there any kind of thing in particular? I mean, is the Doctor Who movie something that you would kind of hold up as kind of like being the favorite thing you did, or is it something else, or what was it you kind of look back on?
Well, I had a few favorite things. I mean,
Mhm.
I think the thing that most people don't know much about my involvement in was Twin Peaks.
Ah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was the network executive in charge of Twin Peaks,
Mhm.
and so I worked on the original series,
Mhm.
and was it was my baby.
Mhm.
And so I love that, and of course, it almost got me fired because they were really scared about what we were doing and what was
Mhm.
what was happening. But I loved it, and if you look real hard, whenever you go to the Great Northern Hotel, the bar,
Mhm.
take a look at the piano player.
I'm gonna have to go and check that out after this. That's,
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that was a show that changed the TV kind of landscape, and that's a major kind of um, it kind of opened up a lot of doors, that one, just because it was so different and just so experimental.
Yeah, it was fun.
Mhm.
I love that show, and I was very proud to be a part of it.
Mhm.
And then, of course, the other one was ER.
Mhm.
You know, my dear friend Billy Campbell and I, who he was running
Mhm.
Warner Brothers at the time, and I was running Amblin Television, and
Mhm.
we developed ER and sold it to NBC.
Mhm.
And that was a great show.
Mhm. I mean, again, that's another one that it really became a kind of a model for all the medical shows that kind of followed, of which there has
Yeah,
been a
yeah,
lot.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I've done quite a lot in my career. I've
Mhm.
very proud of it.
Mhm.
It was great fun.
Yeah. No, I mean, I must admit, I didn't realize those two. I mean, it's I knew you had a really kind of impressive career, but it's even more impressive than I realized.
Oh well, thank you, very kind.
Yeah. So just to kind of wrap up there, just again, I just want to kind of pass on like my kind of personal thanks for the TV movie. As a fan, it's something that not only myself but my kids really enjoy. It was,
Oh, wonderful.
it's been nice kind of like going through the TV show with them, and like again, even though it's just the one episode, McGann is like one of their favorite doctors. It's amazing how just a very short 90 minutes can just make such a big impact on people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It doesn't take much,
Mhm.
um, but I'm thrilled that it's been embraced, especially by the ongoing producers who
Mhm.
who have sort of lifted from the TARDIS interior and lifted from some of the narrative, and that's
Mhm.
nice. It makes you feel good when they don't want to sort of, you
Mhm.
know, throw it away.
Yeah, I mean, that is something I've really enjoyed. Is just that it started off with just little nods, like maybe a picture of Paul here or there, and they've just gradually built it up, and they've always just really included it. And like I say, it's nice in a way as well that they haven't closed the door on some of those ideas. I mean,
Right.
I know not every fan likes the idea of the half human thing, but I thought that was quite interesting, and it does give you like a whole new place to go.
Yeah, well, yeah, it wasn't everybody's cup of tea. I still get hissed and booed for that sometimes at conventions, but I stand behind it, and I don't
Mhm.
have any regrets.
Mhm. Well, thanks for talking to us tonight. It's
Of course.
been a really great chat, and it has just been really good just finding out some of these things about the movie. I mean, it sounds like such an uphill battle. So, I mean, again, thanks for sticking it out for 7 years to kind of get it made
Oh,
like that.
my pleasure. Thank you for your interest. I appreciate it. See, I enjoyed talking to you.
No problem. Well, thanks very much, and
Okay,
good
take
night for
care.
now.
Bye.
Bye, Phil.